I like collecting cheap store brand and no name brand blank cassette tapes because they have eye-catching graphics, they're very colorful, and they have some interesting made-up names like Magnasonic, which makes you think of Magnavox and Panasonic.
I know a genuine Panaphonics when I see it. And look, there's Magnetbox and Sony.
So I really like the way they look, but unfortunately I don't like the way they sound. Most of them make very poor quality recordings with a lot of hiss and dropouts, and trying to use Dolby noise reduction just makes them sound worse instead of better. So that's why cassette experts give these tapes the unofficial designation Type 0 and tell you to stay away from them. Nonetheless, I couldn't resist getting this bonus pack of Randix tapes, buy 5 and save. And I started thinking to myself, is there some way I can make these tapes usable? Because I mean, if you look at it, they have screws holding them together so you can take them apart and put different tape inside them. For example, from a good quality name brand cassette that you found loose, somebody already recorded their own stuff on it and put their own label on it, and you don't have the matching card and case for it, so it's not really worth anything as a collector's value, but it does have good tape inside it that you could transplant into one of these. So this is what I would call remastering or repacking cheap cassette tapes with good tape in them. You can even use a Type 2 high bias chrome position tape as the donor tape, just as long as you only use it to record on a deck that has a manual tape type selector, because they won't have those extra notches for the decks which have automatic tape type detection. Because if you put Type 2 high bias tape into this shell, the lack of those extra notches would mean that a deck with automatic tape type detection would still think this is a regular Type 1 tape, and it would not use the correct bias or equalization. And most good quality name brand cassettes do use screwed shells, making them easy to open, but in case you want to use a sealed cassette shell as a donor, you could just crack it open because you're only interested in the tape inside. You're not interested in keeping this shell intact. And to do the transplant, all you really need is a clean, well-lit work surface, a small Phillips or JIS screwdriver, and maybe a pair of tweezers to help you guide the tape into its proper position. You should also have the tape fully rewound or fast-forwarded. So now you just need to start unscrewing it. Okay, the screws are loose. I should be able to take off the top cover. This may need another turn or two. Okay, cover is removed. We now have our tape to remove. And this is the cheap tape I'm going to dispose of. So there's our unwanted tape. And you want to inspect the slip sheets because a lot of older cassettes use graphite coated slip sheets, which means they eventually wear off the graphite and wear out. Whereas the better quality ones use a different material that doesn't wear out. So you may want to transplant the slip sheets from the donor cassette. But otherwise the rollers and the little pressure pad can stay if they're intact and in good condition. Now unscrewing the donor cassette. There you can see the slip sheet does not look worn, so I'm going to transplant these slip sheets as well as the tape. So here's the donor tape. I want to carefully lift that out of the cassette. The tape pack on these is usually pretty firm, so you can just kind of grab it and pick it up without it unspooling. There's the other slip sheet. So I'm going to transplant these slip sheets. Take out these graphite coated ones that wear out and put in these from the donor cassette. And this has a small window, so it's not going to block it. So that may be a consideration if your tape that you're transplanting into is a clear shell, and if you put one of these slip sheets into it's not going to look clear anymore. So that's one thing to keep in mind. And here's the other side of the shell I'm going to be transplanting into. So take out the cheap graphite coated slip sheet and put in our donor slip sheet. And now we can transplant in the donor tape. And this is the tricky part, getting it all lined up where it needs to go. That's where those tweezers may come in handy, because you have to get it right in the middle of all those little teeth there in the middle. But I think we're almost there. Sometimes it tends to pop out on you, so it may take several tries, but just be patient. Okay, I think that is pretty much it. We have our donor tape transplanted, the slip sheets transplanted, the pressure pad is intact and properly located, as are the rollers. On this side we have the donor slip sheet as well, so we can close the shell. Make sure we don't pinch the tape and that it goes underneath all these little tabs. And that looks like we have successfully transplanted. Now we just need to put the screws back in, and that's really about it. Okay, we now have a tape that looks like a cheap Randix no-name brand cassette with its super colorful packaging, but it actually contains much higher quality Maxell epitaxial XL1S superferric type 1 normal bias tape. So it's still a type 1 tape, so it's going to be completely compatible with any machine we put it in, but it's going to make much better quality recordings than the original tape that was in this. Actually, one little gotcha I just noticed now, there's no window on that tape anymore. That's because the high quality Maxell tape is built into the shell, a plastic window, while this cheap Randix tape, it was just using the slip sheet as the window to protect the tape inside, whereas the slip sheets from the Maxell had a cutout for the window. So now this is completely open. I could stick my screwdriver right through it. But I don't plan on taking this to the beach and getting sand in it, so it's not a big concern to me. If this was back in the 80s or 90s and I was taking this in my car all over the place and it could get dirt and dust in it, then I would be concerned. But when I'm just using this at home, it's not a big concern. I'm not going to be sticking my fingers in there. And it's actually kind of cool to have it completely open in the middle there. So that's one thing to keep in mind. You have to check whether your shell that you're transplanting into has a real window, or if it was just using the slip sheets to protect the tape. Another thing to pay attention to is this little piece of metal behind the pressure pad. This is called the Mu Metal Shield, and its purpose is to reduce hum when recording. And now some really cheap tapes leave this out because I think it was really intended for decks that use AC motors, and now that most cassette decks use DC motors, it's not really as necessary, but it's still good to have anyway. So you want to make sure this is intact into the shell you want to be transplanting into, and this one did have that shield, but some of the newer cheap tapes don't. Now I'll give you a direct comparison between a recording I'll make on this Randix tape, which still has its original cheapo, no-name, low-quality tape inside it, and this Randix tape, which I transplanted into the higher quality Maxell tape. And I think you'll agree that even though it still looks the same, it now sounds a lot better. And I made both of these recordings at the same level, so if one sounds louder than the other, that means the tape is more sensitive and was better able to capture the audio signal being recorded onto it. And now alternating between the cheap tape and the remastered tape every 10 seconds. Normally, the darker the color of the tape is, the higher quality it is. But in this case, that's not true, because on the bottom here, the transplanted Maxell tape is actually a slightly lighter shade of brown than the original lower quality Randix tape. And you can also do this with a pre-recorded cassette, especially modern cassettes that don't always use the best quality of tape. They don't usually have the best quality recording. They almost always don't have Dolby noise reduction on them anymore. So you could take one of these pre-recorded cassettes. If it has a screwed shell, you could open it up, transplant in higher quality tape, and re-record the album on it from a digital copy. But unless the album happens to be a common length, like 60 minutes, the donor cassette is probably not going to be the same length. So you're either going to end up with a lot of blank tape at the end of the album, or maybe you can fill it up with bonus tracks, or you could custom splice the tape to the correct length for the album, but that's a little bit more involved. But generally, I think the quality of the tape in pre-recorded cassettes is good enough that you don't need to go through all that trouble. All you really need to do is just take a piece of tape to cover up the notch and re-record over it with your own copy of the album using a higher quality machine running at normal speed instead of the high-speed duplication that these are made with, using Dolby noise reduction or whatever else you want to use to make a better quality recording of the same music onto the tape. And this is one of the things I like about cassettes. You can experiment with them, you can transplant parts, you can make them do things that nobody ever thought they could. Not like a vinyl record or a CD, which is only ever going to sound as good as it did originally. This is like taking a Volkswagen Beetle and putting a Porsche engine in it. Still looks like a Volkswagen, but certainly doesn't sound or perform like one anymore.